Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for the call. This is Claire Scheer from PA Med. I feel confident that we are going to answer many of your questions through this presentation. Unfortunately, there are some that we might not be able to answer at this particular time. A little later, we will cover it more in depth, but we do have a website, www.pamedsoc.org/Hahnemann. And that's where us and our partners are putting the information as we learn it and as it comes to us and as we discover it. And it is changing often. So if you don't get your questions answered today, probably because at this point your particular question doesn't have an answer, we continue to work on this and we hope to be able to answer your questions in the future. So I would encourage you to check back there often. So at this point, I am going to turn the program over to Angela Boateng, our PA Med counsel, and I'm going to let her go ahead and start. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. As Claire said, my name is Angela Boateng. I'm General Counsel for the Pennsylvania Medical Society. And again, we'd love to thank you for joining us tonight on this Hahnemann University Hospital St. Christopher's bankruptcy update. I'm joined today by several presenters who will highlight several points of information as we go along in this evening's presentation. These presenters include Mark Osterberry, Executive Director of the Philadelphia County Medical Society, Dr. David Eisenberg, Associate Professor of Medicine with Drexel University College of Medicine, Karen Davidson from the Law Offices of Karen Davidson, Brierly Laban with Laurel Road, Jason Methner with Laurel Road, Jeremy Ryan, attorney with Potter Anderson and Caroon, Claire Scheer, you just heard from her. She's our Senior Director here at the Medical Society for Membership and Communications, and Brian Vanderberg, General Counsel for the American Medical Association. Before we begin, I'd like to review the disclaimers for this presentation. Every effort has been made to provide complete and accurate information. However, please be advised that this is a rapidly evolving situation. The stakeholders make no warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy of the content of the information provided. The inclusion of the insurance brokers, agents, and companies do not constitute or imply endorsement, recommendation, or favoring of the stakeholders on this webinar. And of course, the information provided for this is for informational purposes only and is not intended and should not be construed to constitute legal advice. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Osterberry.
Thank you, Angela. You know, organized medicine has engaged in this issue from the get-go, back when the hospital first announced its closing. The physician leadership from the Philadelphia County Medical Society, the Pennsylvania Medical Society, the American Medical Association, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, and the Association from American Medical Colleges all are committed to finding real-time solutions for this endeavor. We know that information and knowledge will be the key to playing an important role to give you control back to where your destiny is. Next slide. Like every presentation, we want to make sure that we outline what our intentions are. We're going to give an update on the affected Hahnemann and St. Christopher residents, fellows, and attendings. We're going to provide information to make informed decisions regarding the pursuit of tail coverage. And our objectives are this: review the Pennsylvania law regarding medical professional liability insurance. We're going to explain to you claims-made insurance policies. We're going to provide an update on stakeholders' effort on behalf of the affected physicians and recommend next steps to secure tail coverage. I'd like to introduce Dr. Eisenberg again. Angela had done that. David and I have been working together for the last 4 months, and it's been a pleasure. So David?
Thanks, Mark. And I also just wanted to, before I give some of the background, I wanted to thank the organizations that have really stepped up to help during this crisis, particularly you, Mark, the Philadelphia County Medical Society, the PA Medical Society, and the AMA. They've really been integral in helping figure some of this out. So my role is to give a little bit of background as to how we came to this position. And it's a really complicated story, obviously, with all of the things that have happened. But the things that are really pertinent to this malpractice issue are listed here. So as all of you know, in January 2018, the company purchased Hahnemann and St. Christopher's. And along with that, at that time, they purchased a claims-made insurance policy. This is different than some other insurance policies, and the main point is that this actually expires, whereas other insurance policies can protect people indefinitely for the time that they worked at these hospitals. And then, as we all very well know, on June 30th of this year, PAHS filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and displaced hundreds of residents, fellows, and attendings from employment. Along with this, a plan was made to actually terminate the claims-made policy that was purchased back in 2018 to end on January 10th, 2020. And so this is the major issue that we'll be talking about today, is that physicians who worked at Hahnemann and or St. Chris are at risk for not having malpractice professional liability tail insurance at the end of this policy period, which is January 10th, 2020. Next slide. So who is affected? Let's start with Hahnemann. So basically anyone who was employed by Hahnemann and had patient care responsibilities between the dates of January 10th, 2018 and September 6th, 2019, or whenever your employment officially ended with the hospital. And so one cautionary note, and I know many of you on the call, you're in this bucket, residents, fellows, and attendings, even if you were only there for a short time, so new interns or new fellows who just started in 2019, this still affects you because you had patient care responsibility for a short period of time while you were at Hahnemann. So that you are impacted even though you were there for a short time. Next slide. For St. Christopher's residents, fellows, and attendings, anyone who trained between January 10th, 2018 through December 14th, 2019, and actually left for whatever reason before the ownership transition just recently. So if you graduated from a residency program or left St. Chris before the transfer to the Tower Drexel ownership, then you are affected. Tower Health will provide malpractice insurance for trainees who are still employed at the time of transition from AHS to Tower Drexel. And the same thing for St. Chris's. If you were only there for a short period of time, but still between those dates that are listed above and left, then you are affected and you need to pay very close attention to the rest of this presentation. Next slide. And so as you can see, the numbers are really large, and these are only estimates. We have actually been unsuccessful in obtaining a complete master list of contacts and email addresses. And so we have relied on many of you to help spread the word, whether it's through email or social media or word of mouth, that this is an issue, and we will continue to rely on you to do this. But our estimates are that there are about 1,400 people who are affected by this potential lack of tail malpractice insurance. At Hahnemann, they're a group of attendings. They're obviously a group of orphaned residents or fellows who were there until the hospital closed. And then there are approximately 400 residents and fellows who previously trained, but either graduated or left their programs prior to the closure of the hospital. At St. Chris's, this is an estimate and we're still gathering information. There are about 60 residents and fellows who previously trained there that are affected, and about 15 attendings who are affected. And so another cautionary note is that individuals are affected even though employment contracts state that occurrence or tail coverage would be purchased. And we've heard from many of you pointing out that your contracts, specifically the 2019 to 2020 contract, actually said that the hospitals would provide occurrence-based coverage. That did not happen. And obviously that is something that lawyers are aware of, but just know that you are still at risk even though your contract stated otherwise. And with that, I believe I'm transitioning to Angela to do the next part.
Thanks, Dr. Eisenberg. So here we'll talk a little bit about the requirements in Pennsylvania and how it relates to the insurance that was provided to the affected residents. As everyone on this call probably already knows, all physicians must maintain professional liability insurance in Pennsylvania. It's a condition of licensure, and it's important to note that Pennsylvania is not alone in this requirement. There are at least 15 other states that require liability insurance as a condition of licensure. So if there are any affected physicians who are on the phone who are training or employed in another state that were formerly affiliated with Hahnemann, please check with your state, your program or your employer to learn more detail, more information about your state's insurance requirements. So per Pennsylvania's legal requirement, American Academic, Philadelphia Academic did secure insurance coverage, as Dr. Eisenberg noted, for its physicians. And we are aware, at least in the case of residents and fellows, again, as Dr. Eisenberg noted, that the hospital agreed to provide occurrence policies, which would have automatically included the tail. However, as you all know, that's not what happened. The hospital, in fact, provided claims-made policies which require the insured to secure a tail or its equivalent upon termination or cancellation of the policy to prevent a gap in coverage. Now, the claims-made coverage the physicians received depended on whether the physician was qualified to receive an unrestricted license to practice medicine in the state. Those physicians who had not completed the requisite amount of postgraduate training and therefore did not qualify to receive an unrestricted license were covered under the hospital's claims-made coverage and shared the hospital's policy limits. This group would include, for example, physicians in their intern year, physicians who graduated from an unaccredited medical program and was in their second year of training. We've seen several questions come up about this particular issue. This group is the group that's being referred to by some of the carriers as being MCARE ineligible. And that's not a term that's recognized by MCARE, but it's one that's being sort of floated around or put out there. Those physicians who had completed the requisite amount of postgraduate training and were qualified meaning they didn't necessarily have, but were qualified to receive an unrestricted license, received physicians' professional liability coverage, a separate line of coverage with their own separate limits. This group is being termed, quote unquote, the MCARE eligible group by some of the carriers. Again, not a term that's recognized by MCARE, but one that's being used to categorize these groups by the carriers, some of the carriers. As I mentioned earlier, upon termination of any claims-made policy, its tail insurance is required to prevent a gap in coverage. And unfortunately, as a result of this bankruptcy, physicians are being required to secure their own tail. We've learned that physicians who are under the hospital's claims-made policy, the so-called MCARE ineligibles, are having problems securing tail insurance because they were covered under the hospital's policy and did not have their own policies with their own limits. Unfortunately, despite the fact that these individuals are unable to secure tail insurance, their own policies, we still need to, or this group still needs to secure coverage to mitigate any potential risks. Recognizing that this group is still at risk, the stakeholders, the AMA, PA Med, Philadelphia County Medical Society and others are talking to carriers to explore other options for covering this group. In addition, we are planning on informing the state, or at least alerting the state medical board about this issue to advocate for leniency if disciplinary action would arise related to this gap in coverage. And in Karen's slide, she'll talk a little bit about what we mean by disciplinary action as a result of this gap in coverage. So right now, I'll turn it over to Karen.
So just to recap a little bit, claims, when you have a claims made policy, you need to purchase a tail in order to have coverage for any incidents that occurred during the claims made policy period. So that policy period is going to end on January 10th, 2020. When you have a tail to a claims made policy, that covers you for the cost to defend against a claim that comes in after the date that the policy ended. So for example, you would have your legal defense costs covered. If there was a judgment against you, that would be covered to the policy limit. If there were a settlement of some sort. Without having that coverage, you are at risk for being responsible personally for all of those things. So again, that's the reason why, you know, it's strongly recommended for people to get the tail policy, because it will protect you against those risks of going bare. The other issue that is related to that is the fact that, thank you for the slide, is the fact that, you know, claims can be brought, for those of you who treated pediatric patients, claims may be brought many years down the road when the patient reaches the age of majority, 18, 21. So you could be looking potentially at a lawsuit that could come in within a decade or 2 decades, and then all of a sudden this issue would rear its ugly head. On this next slide here, this is why we want to discuss why going bare is not recommended. We've gotten a lot of questions of people saying, okay, I don't have any claims, I'm not concerned, or I was only there a short period of time. These are some of the reasons why going bare is not recommended. In Pennsylvania, you could lose your license. And yes, that would have to be reciprocal and reported to the other state licensing boards. Basically, in Pennsylvania, you have an ownership interest in your medical license. That ownership interest still continues to exist if you are simply inactive. If you were going to choose to go bare, and you would have to look at all the implications, and we would recommend you speak to your own individual legal counsel, but you would have to surrender your license completely and fully, rather than going through this, leaving it just to be inactive. Otherwise, you could still have the disciplinary action taken against you. If disciplinary action it is reciprocal with other states, you would have to report, that would have to be reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. And then you would be personally on the line and liable for any lawsuits and or any defense costs. So your own personal assets could be at risk. So depending on the state that you're in, that could be your home, even if you jointly own that home with your spouse. If there is a judgment against you, and yes, you would have all the out-of-pocket legal fees and defense costs and pay any sort of settlement. But if that judgment is then sort of listed as something that has been taken against you, then you would have to report that. And what we have seen is that the questions on applications for malpractice insurance policies, third-party payer credentialing applications, the questions on those forms are very broadly written. Participation with Medicare. They may very well ask you, have you ever surrendered your medical license, and the reasons for that. So that is something that you would have to answer to potentially for the remainder of your career. And the failure to properly respond and correctly list why it was perhaps surrendered or lost could potentially be a fraudulent response on any of those types of forms. The other piece that I'm, often on the front lines negotiating employment agreements. Many employment agreements will have a provision in there that requires you to represent and promise and warrant that you have at all times in your professional history prior to that employment been covered by malpractice insurance. And so you may also be asked to indemnify your potential employer. And so what that means is agreeing to pay your employer's costs and expenses and legal bills if they get dragged into something because of some misrepresentation or the fact that you didn't have coverage. So again, we are trying to sound the alarm about this issue and the potential downsides and concerns that you might be impacted with if you go bare. I think I'm going to turn it over to you now, Mark.
Thanks, Karen. Again, what have we been doing since that time? Again, the advocacy efforts amongst our small coalition of people that we've been all working together. As Dr. Eisenberg had said, we can't emphasize enough if you can help us to get the word out to your colleagues, because there's no complete list that we're trying to work from. We hobbled a list together, and the best we have is what we have. So we'll continue to try to reach out to everybody, because we know that, as Dr. Eisenberg said, there's probably close to over 1,000 people that are affected by this crisis. But what we've been doing is we send a letter to all the designated institutional officers, alerting them that something's coming up. Again, that this the crisis was impending. Also, the Pennsylvania Joint Underwriters Association coverage reimbursement. There was a letter that insurance department and Pennsylvania Joint Underwriters Association sent a letter to the insurance commissioner requesting to use some of the surplus funds of their of the association to help underwrite the costs for the residents as well as the attendings, and that's still pending with the insurance commissioner. The State Medical Society and the County Society developed an informational brief for affected residents and fellows and attendings. I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We made a landing page at the Pennsylvania Medical Society. If you need to get there, you have any questions or concerns or any additional follow-ups all the time, you need to check back because this will be updated periodically. And then lastly, the AMA supported legal representation in the Hahnemann proceedings. And there's been an ad hoc committee that had formed. When we say Hahnemann, we're also very much concerned with the folks at St. Chris's. So nobody's been going unnoticed. Next slide. And I wanted to just talk a little bit more about the letter that we sent out to the institutions of the designated institutional officers. That there was a stakeholder letter that went out the beginning of December, asked that requested them to consider medical liability insurance for the residents that they took in as an orphan. There was also a request for additional medical liability insurance for the Hahnemann trainees to prevent gaps in their coverage. So I'm pleased to report through the designated institutional officer that there was the institutions. We reached out to about 91 institutions that accepted the orphans, and we heard from about 16% of those institutions. 8 said that they maybe would take him, which would take to investigate prior act or tail coverage. That would equal about 211 trainees. 3 institutions flat out just kind of said no, and only for the fact about it was they couldn't do it, and that represented about four trainees. And there were 4 institutions that did say yes, that they could provide tail or prior act coverage, and that represented about 17 trainees. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Claire to talk a little, or excuse me, to Angela to talk a little bit more about the JUA letter.
Thanks, Mark. So the JUA, the Joint Underwriting Association, is poised to assist the physicians affected by the bankruptcy. The JUA is one of several carriers in Pennsylvania writing medical professional liability insurance for Pennsylvania's physicians. On November 26th, the JUA sent a letter to the Pennsylvania Department of Insurance to notify the department of its intent to use its surplus funds to reimburse up to 50% of tail coverage for the affected residents and fellows and up to 10% for the displaced attendings. The JUA brought this issue to the attention of the Department of Insurance for the department to determine whether prior approval was needed for the JUA to proceed with this action. While the JUA waits for a response from the department, it continues to accept applications and prepare quotes for its applicants. There is an abbreviated application to help move the process along. The JUA recognizes the importance of expediting this process to ensure that those who are interested can get coverage. So they have that abbreviated application on their website, and the link to their website is located on this slide and also on the PA Med Hahnemann site. Several people have asked questions about the 50% of coverage for Hahnemann residents and the 10% of coverage, and actually how that's going to play out in terms of how that payment will be made or reimbursement will be made. I'm sure the JUA will come out with, contact the JUA for more detail about how that coverage will be provided as they continue to sort of work out the details. Again, right now, this decision to reimburse up to 50% of the cost for residents and fellows and 10% of coverage for the displaced attendings is still pending. A response from the State Department, but they should have additional information about that soon. On this page, we have the claims made insurance primer that we released earlier this month for the residents and fellows affected by the Hahnemann closure, and also have a similar one for the attending physicians. This document, which is located on the PA Med website, provides information regarding the Pennsylvania's medical professional liability insurance requirements, a brief explanation of claims made policies, and suggested next steps for the affected physicians. And this document was produced jointly by the Medical Society and the Philadelphia County Medical Society. PA Med thanks the AMA, Dr. Eisenberg, and the other participating stakeholders for all of their assistance in helping us get this information together as quickly as possible. And here we have the Hahnemann University Hospital closure website, and our communications director, Claire Scherer, will tell us a little bit about this landing page.
So I think at the end, we actually have the link there for you, but I'm going to remind you of it again. Many of the questions I'm seeing come through are answered there at the Hahnemann website. That is www.pamedsoc.org/Hahnemann. And I encourage you to go there and check often because I know that the team that you're hearing here on the phone tonight is talking every day, is updating each other every day on the things that they have learned. And what we decided when this first started is, hey, we need a landing spot for all of this ebb and flow of information, and this is where we can find it. If you go there and you're not finding what you think should be there, there is also a form that you can complete, and that sends an email actually to me. And I take that email and go to the appropriate expert and see if we do have an answer. And if we do, we will answer you and also put that on the site there. And if we don't, we will let you know that we don't have the answer because unfortunately, this situation has a lot of unanswered questions that we continue to try to work on for you, but sometimes there's not answers. But that's the best way to get your question into the hopper and to get the quickest answer for us. So I invite you to go back there often and check it because we are certainly updating that every day as soon as we know something. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Claire. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brian and Jeremy to provide an update on the AMA Ad Hoc Committee.
I'm not hearing you guys. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Oh, okay. As you've heard, there's been a multifaceted, all hands on deck effort in advocating to address this issue. And as we looked at all of the different parallel paths here, one of the things that we identified as being necessary was to ensure that the impacted residents and fellows had legal representation of their own, representing your interests specifically in the pending bankruptcy court matter and related issues. So what we've done at the AMA is made arrangements to retain counsel on your behalf and underwrite the costs of those, with that counsel being Jeremy, who you'll speak, who you will hear from in a moment. And the costs are being underwritten by the AMA, but the representation is on behalf of an ad hoc committee of impacted residents and fellows, many of whom are on this call. Jeremy, I'll let you walk through the steps that have been taken to date in the litigation.
Thank you, Brian. So last 2 weeks ago, the residents and fellows of St. Christopher's filed a motion to try and compel St. Christopher's to buy a tail for those people who weren't going with the sale. And as a result of a hearing on that, we, on behalf of the ad hoc committee, filed an emergency motion to try to compel Hahnemann to buy a tail for the Hahnemann residents and fellows. The same day, the Pennsylvania Department of Health also filed a very similar motion. There was a hearing set for yesterday, and the night before, we received a call from Hahnemann, who has indicated, at least belatedly, a desire to try to become part of the solution and not just the problem. The reality is that Hahnemann, no one knows how much a tail to cover everybody would cost, but we do know that Hahnemann does not have enough assets right now to buy a tail before January 10th. So while that's the relief we requested, it was going to be very difficult because Hahnemann just does not have the money to do that. So what Hahnemann has offered to do, and what we're trying to pursue, is we've agreed to continue the hearing on the motion until January. In the meantime, Hahnemann is supposed to, and it should be today or tomorrow, they were going to get us a full roster of all the affected residents and fellows from both hospitals and try to get us the best contact information they had, along with some details about each of your residencies, your specialties, your tenure at Hahnemann or St. Chris, your NPS number, so that we can try and at least cobble together a more complete list of everyone and trying to get contact information from everybody. As part of this, the Pennsylvania Department of Health has agreed to contact its two sister agencies in Pennsylvania, the Department of State, which is the department under which the Medical Licensing Board is housed, and then the Department of Insurance. And we're trying to bring those two agencies into these discussions, as was discussed before, for licensing, to try and get a leniency or amnesty program for those residents that cannot obtain a tail, and also to try and get the Department of Insurance to approve the Joint Underwriters Association's request to fund those. One thing we're also trying to do is take another run at the major institutions that have accepted orphans and sit down again with them and try and convince them that there are consequences should orphans lose their ability to practice medicine, and consequences with respect to Medicare funding. We're, with the assistance of the ACGME and the AAMC, we're doing research right now and also contacting CMS, which is the Center for Medicare, to try and get the best argument we can to take to these institutions that it's in their financial interest to buy their orphans' tails. So those are the efforts we're undertaking to do it. Hahnemann has also offered to put up a sum of money, which is not insubstantial, but not enough to buy a tail, which would become a fund to help reimburse those orphans who had to buy a tail out of their own pocket. So we're looking at what we're trying to take a look at what assets Hahnemann really has and what they're planning on spending their money for, because it's not an operating hospital, as we all know. We're trying to get a sense of how much money there is that we can try and get into that fund. And then we're also trying to explore what other parties might be able to contribute to a reimbursement fund like that, so that people can at least get partial reimbursement if they have to buy their own tails. So those are the legal actions that we're trying to get underway, and we'll see how far we can get before January 6th, which is the next time on our hearing. And we're hopeful that we can accomplish a number of these steps and at least lessen the hardships that this situation poses.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Brian. So Brian and Jeremy touched on some of the next steps that are being taken. Just wanted to emphasize a couple of other points right here on this slide. So very important for the Hahnemann residents and fellows. If you've not already done so, please join the AMA-sponsored ad hoc committee. We had Jeremy's contact information and contact information to join the ad hoc committee on the previous slide. This information is also found on the PA Med Hahnemann website. Please do that as soon as possible to receive additional updates on the progress of the committee and what's going on with regard to the work in the bankruptcy court. For all residents and fellows, Hahnemann and St. alike, definitely very important, and this is probably should be bullet number one: obtain a quote for coverage as soon as possible. Do not wait for those who are involved in the on the ad hoc committee in the litigation through the bankruptcy court. Don't wait for that to come to resolution. Please go out and get a quote as soon as you possibly can. As we mentioned previously, we've been in contact with the DIOs for most, or if not all, of the receiving institutions to let them know what the situation is. Please follow up with them as well. Now that at least awareness has been heightened about this issue with this group of DIOs having the conversation, they should be familiar with the issue. Please feel free to direct them to, if they're not familiar with the issue, please feel free to direct them to the Hahnemann, PA Med Hahnemann site, and pull any additional resources that you need from there to help explain the situation. One of the other things that we're suggesting the affected residents, attendings, et cetera, to do is submit a notice of potential claims to the PA Risk Retention Group, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. But before we do, I will turn it over to Karen to talk a little bit about getting quotes.
What you're going out there, what you're shopping for is essentially a standalone tail policy. And that's something that you want to start getting into the queue, because it's a process, right? There's no cost to you to start that quote process. So that's the recommendation. You're not on the line for paying for it. In fact, coverage won't even be bound until a check is received by the insurance company. So that's first priority here, is get into the queue for obtaining the quote. That requires you to first have a loss run or a claims history run from your prior carriers. And the contact here for PARRG, which was the carrier for Hahnemann / St. Chris, and then the prior owner tenant. And those folks know that this is something that needs to happen. I did see something in the correspondences this week that it's taking at least a week to get the loss runs done, and it could be more if everybody tries to get into the queue at the same time. And then while you're going through this process of obtaining a quote, you want to go to a broker. Find a broker. You can look at the JUA. You can shop for the costs. I am hearing that the different insurers, the different carriers, the costs can be different. And so there, as Angela had mentioned, there was contact information for the JUA on the PA Med's website. On that document that Angela had up previously, there is information about different brokers who you can contact, and they will help marshal you through and have you sign, or electronically or whatever, get documents in to authorize the loss run reports and things of that sort. But just to be clear, just because you request a quote doesn't mean you're purchasing the coverage. You're getting that loss run handled. And the coverage would not be bound until full payment is received. We are recommending that you try to get that coverage bound by that January 10th, 2020 date, with the fact that the claims made policy ends on January 11th. And obviously things may happen between now and then, but that's the goal and objective here, because we don't want you to then maybe not have it by the January 10th date. And let's say you get it in February and a claim comes in between January and 10th and February when you get the coverage bound. If that happens, you're going to be on the hook and personally liable to any defense or any of those things that I mentioned previously for that. And that one broker, you know, in Pennsylvania, you typically can have some period of time after the policy ends to buy the coverage. But as the broker aptly said to me, it's like trying to get fire insurance after your house is burned down, right? You're not going to get coverage for a claim that comes in. And that's why we are focusing on that January 10th date. And again, check that PA Med site for the broker information. Can I have the next slide, please?
And Karen, before you go into detail on this next slide, I just wanted to address some of the questions that have come up about the obtaining tails, specifically for those people who are being labeled MCARE ineligible. I think one of the questions that popped up is as an MCARE ineligible person, I thought that I couldn't get a quote, or I'm not getting a quote. This is true. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, those individuals who have been, are being considered MCARE ineligible by the carriers are having difficulty obtaining coverage. I think this should not stop you from continuing to try to shop around to see if you can find somebody who will provide you coverage. The information that we provided in the PA Med Philly County Medical Society brief is not an exhaustive list of carriers that are available. They're the ones that we were aware of at the time we put out the publication. So please feel free to reach out to other carriers that may be able to assist. And as you're doing that, again, as Brian and Jerry mentioned, and some of the other stakeholders, we are doing our best to try to talk to the carriers that we are aware of to see what other solutions may be available for you.
And Angela, another question is, should I buy the insurance before January 10th, or should I get the quote before January 10th?
We'll get the quote definitely before January 10th, but we'll go into a little bit more detail during the question and answer period. Sorry for jumping in there, Karen.
No, I agree, Angela. I think that's important. And, we do have you folks, the non-MCARE eligibles in the forefront of our minds. So we are, we're working to try to see what options there may be. Okay, so the next slide here is cost of tail coverage. There's been a lot of questions in this particular situation, because what we have here is a standalone tail policy. The policy in insurance world speak is basically fully earned, meaning that the entire lump sum needs to be paid in full. And typically there's a very short time period, and what we're saying is we would recommending that be paid in full by that January 10th date, again, subject to those other factors as Angela was mentioning. So there's typically a very short time to purchase. The amount of the tail varies by specialty. So if you're in obstetrics and gynecology, you're going to be at the high end. And we've heard very high quotes on tail coverage there, because the coverage is typically based on a percentage of annual premium along with other factors. So it could be anywhere from 100 to 300% of whatever the annual premium might have been for your coverage during the time that you had the policy. And again, that's wanting that coverage in place before that January 10th date. We've been inquiring about the possibility, for those of you that might not be in a position, knowing what you all have in terms of your loan pressure, possibly that there may be some low interest loans with deferral of repayment or the interest until such time as you, graduate and or get your first position. So we're recommending, obviously, check with your employer, your institution to see. Many of the nonprofit hospitals and health systems do offer, or sometimes offer loans to physicians as part of employment. And maybe that's something if they're not willing to purchase the tail outright, maybe they would be willing to offer you some sort of a low interest loan with referral. And I did speak with one individual attending who was, had a home equity loan and was looking at their bank. And then the AMA has put us in touch with Laurel Road. They're going to speak next about some options for loans for you to help with the purchase. I'll turn it over to you, Brierley and Jason.
Thank you. Karen, this is Angela. Before Brierley and Jason jump on, I wanted to just also add here, the fully earned that must be paid in full. There's definitely that with some of the carriers. Please don't let that stop you from talking to the carriers and potentially discussing payment plans if you're unable to make that payment in full for the policies. There's some carriers that will have different options for you to pay incrementally, monthly, or whatever the case may be. So talk to the individual carriers, see how you can provide payment if you are not able to put that money up front. And with that,
thanks, Angela.
Oh, no problem. Turn it over to Brierley and Jason to talk about Laurel Road.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brierley, and I am the Director of Partnerships at Laurel Road. We are here this evening as a partner of the AMA, as we thought it would be helpful to share some information on the personal loan program that Laurel Road offers physicians and residents. So my colleague Jason, who is also on the line, and myself will also be available at the end to help with any questions that you may have that comes out of kind of the information that we're presenting right now. So Laurel Road can be an avenue of liquidity if you need funds fast, and it could be a good option for you if you are currently investigating the ways to help you cover the cost of your coverage. There are two main loan products that we can offer this group here tonight, depending on the stage of your career that you're in at this time. So if you're still in residency, you may be able to borrow up to $45,000 in personal loan. And if you're practicing, you can borrow up to $80,000 with us. Really quickly, a couple of important things to call out here that we thought would be applicable to you all in this group and would be helpful to know. The first thing is that with the Laurel Road personal loan that we can offer to you all, you will not be required to make full payments on this loan while you are still in residency. So we have a special repayment option available to you where you may be able to pay just as little as $25 a month during your training, which will help make those payments more manageable. The second thing I wanted to point out to you tonight is that there are no prepayment penalties, meaning that you can take out the loan to pay the cost of your coverage, and then if your situation happens to change at any time and you no longer need the loan, you are welcome to pay this back immediately or at any time before the loan term ends without penalty. So another important factor to note there. If you are a member of the AMA, you will also get a rate discount off the interest rate that you will receive. However, you do not need to be a member of the AMA to take advantage of a Laurel Road personal loan. We've created a landing page for anyone in this group that is interested in looking at the information and potentially applying. So all you need to do is go to laurelroad.com/PAHS. Next page, please. So it's very, very simple and easy to apply. Head to the landing page for more information, and you can also check your preliminary rates within a couple of minutes through a simple form. Another thing that's important to note is that you don't worry about checking your preliminary rate, as this will not affect your credit score. It's just a soft credit pull that we will do to give you those rates. So when you are, and if you do decide to put in an application, we also wanted to just let you know that if you are putting in an application to cover the cost of your tail coverage, you'll simply just need to select other when selecting the reason for your loan request. So then our team will take it from there. Our team has been well briefed and they know that this support is available to you all. So you are also welcome to come to us with any questions at the end of this webinar, or just email help@Laurel Road, and they'll be able to help with any kind of questions you have around the application or the personal loan experience. Next slide, please. Lastly, this is really just something we have to cover, but this is really kind of what a repayment example looks like. I will not go through this in too much detail here. It is available on the campaign page for you to view, and it's also here in the slides for you. It will be available in the recording. Okay, now handing back to Angela.
Thank you very much, Barley. Appreciate that. So I'd mentioned earlier on the submitting notices of potential claims to the risk retention group that provided coverage to the residents' physician, the residents' attendings, and the fellows. Essentially what this does is provide notice to the risk retention group that might be able to ensure coverage for those claims that are submitted and come to fruition after the claims made policy ended. So again, just giving them is essentially a heads up to the insurance company, like, hey, there's a potential claim, not that it has come in, but I think that this may come in as a claim at a future date, possibly after the claims made policy has ended. And I just want you to sort of note that. So after January 10th, if that potential claim that was submitted materializes, the risk retention group would defend against that particular claim. You can get information on potential claims from Sedgwick and/or Tenet, as noted in the document that we circulated previously, and I believe their contact information was included on one of the earlier slides. Once you get that information, you need to submit it to Linda Ramsey with American Academic, and she will make note of that information, and her contact information is also included on this slide and in the document that we circulated earlier. So with that, we'll go to Mark and Karen for possible recourse and possible long-term recourse.
Angela, thanks. Again, I think the organized medicine is continuing to assess our situation to see if the continuation of a lawsuit or to pursue what our next options are. And I know that residents and attendings may become unsecured creditors in the bankruptcy filing, so there could be some payout or amount on the dollar. Karen, do you want to add anything to that we should be looking at?
I guess at this point, these are somewhat speculative, obviously, but there is history in Pennsylvania for a previous bankruptcy about 20 years ago, and physicians did become unsecured creditors. I had it on good authority from a colleague who represented physicians that, that maybe you didn't get 100%, but you might have gotten 50 cents on the dollar. But again, really what we wanted here to focus today is making sure that you all got the message loud and clear about the tail coverage issues and how to proceed. And we'll certainly be looking, deferring to bankruptcy counsel as well, and have you participate in that, in the ad hoc group, and that will get you information going forward, hopefully. That's all I've got, Angela.
Thank you very much, Karen. So we've come to the end of our presentation. We'll go into question and answer in a few minutes. To submit additional questions during this webinar, and a lot of you have been doing a really good job of submitting them now. You can do that online. If you think of something after this call concludes, you can submit additional questions and get up-to-date information on the Hahnemann landing page on the PA Med website. So with that, we will go into our question and answer period. We are going to cover some of the questions that were submitted by registrants, participants prior to the call. We'll go through some of that. I think that these questions will address many of the ones that have been submitted this evening. There are a couple of new ones that we will possibly address. And one of the popular questions was, again, the difference between the so-called MCARE eligibles and MCARE ineligibles, and what it means to be qualified to obtain an unrestricted license to practice. So we will, after reviewing a couple of these questions, we'll go back to that slide and cover that point with a little bit more detail. So the first question I have is for Karen, and this question is tail insurance required? Do I need to buy tail coverage insurance? Karen, you went over a lot of this in detail in the presentation, but was hoping that you could reiterate some of the same points.
Sure, thank you, Angela. Yes, you know, tail insurance is required. Pennsylvania law requires you to have insurance coverage for all periods. Failure to have the tail means that you did not have insurance for that particular period. There's a variety of cases and physicians who have lost their licenses in Pennsylvania as a result. And the should I get tail coverage, you know, we are strongly recommending that you purchase the tail coverage and don't go bare, because as we said in the previous slide about going bare, what the implications are, the personal liability, the potential for disciplinary action in other states, the need to surrender your license, and then the potential for going forward for the future of claims, and also having to respond to any credentialing or other applications, or even on employment contracts. So, you know, again, to me, it's a very great risk to decide to go there. So, you know, that would be a recommendation I would give to my clients.
Thanks, Karen. You covered a lot of the questions. With your response, you covered a lot of the questions that we had. So I'm going to skip around a little bit here and go to the a somewhat related question about reimbursement if the Hahnemann, and this is for the Hahnemann residents specifically. So if the Hahnemann residents prevail in bankruptcy court, will I be reimbursed for the tail that I have purchased? I don't know, Jeremy, Brian, if you have an answer, no problem, but just wanted to see what your thoughts were about that.
Jeremy, why don't you go ahead and take that?
Yeah, so this is Jeremy. So one of the aspects of the settlement we're trying to reach with Hahnemann is to create a fund for reimbursement. It would be partial reimbursement. But as I said, we're looking to other parties who may also you know, be able to convince to commit to that fund as well. It would be, you know, it would be something down the road. And unfortunately, I can't promise it would be a fast reimbursement. But you know, we're looking to set up that fund. So Hahnemann has committed an initial amount. We're going to try and negotiate that up, and then you know, we're also exploring. So we're exploring litigation options and trying to hold and see if we can create recoveries from those who are responsible for misleading the residents about their insurance, and to see what other recoveries we can create for you.
Thank you for that response. Another somewhat related question in terms of disciplinary action. Karen, I'm hoping that you can cover this one. I'm out of state and I do not plan on coming back. How will this impact me?
Well, partially, you know, it goes back to the issue of that ownership interest that you have in your licensure, and the need for you to potentially surrender that license. The concern is that even if you're in a state that doesn't necessarily require it, and maybe you do surrender your license in a worst case scenario here, and then you go ahead and practice in another state, you may be asked again on future applications and forms if you've ever surrendered your license and what the reason for that is. And so therefore it ends up being something that you are perennially, you know, required to respond to for the remainder of your career. And then there is also that potential that if you do go bare, And if there is a claim that comes down the road, then you sign an employment agreement where you're representing that you have the coverage and had at all times been covered by malpractice insurance before you became an employee there, that you may be responsible, you may lose a position down the road because of it. So I do think it's pretty risky to go down that road.
Thank you, Karen. Jeremy, Brian, we have a number of questions related to the ad hoc committee from the St. Chris residents. And the question that we're seeing here, should St. Chris residents join the AMA ad hoc committee?
Yes, please do. So that we can, one of the things we're really trying to accomplish is the most complete list of everyone affected. And I should also mention that the fund that Hahnemann has committed to create for reimbursement for those who have to purchase their own tails, that is a fund that Hahnemann has said they would, they intend for that fund to be made available to both St. Chris and Hahnemann affected residents.
Thank you, Jeremy. We have a question related to the status of the JUA's offer to pay or reimburse 50% of the tail insurance costs. We covered this information earlier in the slide. Right now, as of this moment, the JUA has not heard from the department, but they're definitely poised to help support the physicians affected by this issue. As soon as they have additional information, I'm sure that they will let us know. We will update the Hahnemann site and provide any additional information to anybody who is interested in that support. And related to that, there was a question from one of the residents who was seeking a quote or is in the process of obtaining a quote and will be pursuing coverage. Again, they want to know the process for obtaining the reimbursement from the JUA should it be approved. Please get in contact with the JUA for additional information about that process. If they have not already posted it on their site, I'm sure that information will be available shortly. Right now, I'd like to go back to that slide that we had about the MCARE eligibles and MCARE ineligibles, just to talk a little bit about who falls into each group. I'll take it back so we can look at the slide quickly. Okay, so there was a question about the MCARE eligibles, quote unquote MCARE eligibles and MCARE ineligibles, and what it means to be qualified to obtain an unrestricted license. In Pennsylvania, in order to obtain or be qualified for an unrestricted license, you have to have completed the requisite number of years of postgraduate education. Depending on your medical degree, the type of medical degree you are holding, you will have completed that postgraduate education at different levels of your training. So for a DO, after having completed 1 year of postgraduate training, you are eligible for an unrestricted license to practice. As an MD who has graduated from an accredited medical school after 2 years of postgraduate education, you are eligible or qualified to receive an unrestricted license to practice medicine in Pennsylvania. And as an MD who is graduated or who graduated from an unaccredited medical college, you would be eligible to obtain an unrestricted license after completing 3 years of postgraduate education. So that is what determines being qualified. There are other factors that you have to meet, of course, in order to obtain the license, but this is one of the major determining factors in how many years of training, postgraduate education training, would make you eligible for obtaining an unrestricted license. So as we had mentioned previously, those individuals who had completed the requisite number of postgraduate education years of training, completed that and were eligible for an unrestricted license, fell into the quote unquote Medicare or MCARE. I've done that probably several times. It's MCARE eligible category. And these are the physicians who had physician professional liability claims made coverage. That's what you're seeing in that right-hand column. Physicians under this policy received their own policy limits and also received individually a second layer of coverage that's provided by MCare. So under this policy, you have policy limits of $500,000 per occurrence, 1.5 million in the aggregate. The under MCare provides, and through the MCare fund, MCare provides the second layer of coverage, which is an additional 500,000 per occurrence, 1.5 in the aggregate. For the individuals who are being considered MCare ineligible, and again, these are individuals who have not completed the requisite number of years of training, postgraduate education training, in order to be qualified for an unrestricted license. Those individuals, for example, like interns, they are included under the hospital's claims-made coverage. And under this hospital's claims-made coverage, you do not have your own individual limits. You share a limit with the hospital. Regardless of what category you fall in, whether you're under the hospital's policy or have your, fall into the category where you have your own individual policies, you have a claims-made policy which needs tail. What we're hearing and what we've heard and what's come up several times in the questioning is that those individuals that fall in that earlier category under the hospital's policy are not able to obtain a quote because they did not have, they're deemed MCare ineligible, meaning that they're under the hospital's policy and don't have their own. The stakeholder group is working to, talking to individual carriers to see what solutions they may be able to come up with to provide coverage for this group. This does not mean that you do not keep moving to try to find a quote, even though it's been a challenge. We encourage you to still reach out to carriers, explain the situation, and see if there are any creative ways that coverage can be provided. And if you do come across a solution and you fall into this group, please feel free, and we encourage you, we ask that you share that solution with us so that we can share it with the others that are in this group. Those individuals who fall or had their own, or were qualified to receive an unrestricted license and had their own policies, we haven't heard any issues with them being able to obtain quotes. They are doing so successfully. So we are aware of that. So I hope that provides additional information about that particular issue. I'm going, oh, go ahead, Claire, I'm sorry.
No, I was I lost it now. Go ahead, I'll find it.
Okay, so one of the other questions, and I think we have a question about how long do we need to maintain tail coverage? Dr. Eisenberg, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So once you purchase a tail, that is actually active and valid in perpetuity. If you purchase a tail with a payment structure and decide not to pay certain payments, I'm not sure what the repercussions of that are, but I assume that that policy becomes null and void. But once you purchase it, it's good forever. I want to take this opportunity to make one additional point in that many people will probably also finance their tail coverage because you can't afford it right away. And this is
We need to get off him because he's breaking up. He's gone.
I think we have lost Dr. Eisenberg.
Looking for jobs, this is something where you can actually ask future employers to add a package. Hello?
Oh, we got you, Dr. Eisenberg, you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. What was the last thing you heard, Angela?
You've been gone a while.
Oh, okay. So I'll just kind of reiterate what I was saying. Tail the question was, how long do you need to maintain tail for? And once you purchase a tail, it's good for perpetuity. And so most people will not have to worry about that unless you're making payments on that tail through a broker or some kind of financing through the insurer. And then when you stop making payments, that'll probably, the policy will become null and void. But most of the time when someone purchases a tail, it's good forever for that period of time. I also wanted to take this opportunity to say that a lot of you, most of you will probably finance a tail, and hopefully get some reimbursement for it through the various methods that Jeremy was outlining. But this is also an opportunity, as some of you are looking for jobs in the next year or two, to actually negotiate some of this in your preliminary contracts. And it's totally fair game to explain to your future employers that this is what happened and you have an outstanding loan for this particular issue. And this may be something that they could cover as well as a way to mitigate some of the costs, just in case not all of it will be reimbursed. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Dr. Eisenberg. And our numbers are beginning to drop. I want to turn it back to any of the speakers to give an opportunity to emphasize a point they want to sort of remind our participants about. For those questions, and we still have a number of questions that were submitted. Some of them we have not addressed during this presentation, but will address in some follow-up on our website. So please go back to that site to find additional information. So I'm gonna go down the speakers list and just sort of one by one, see if you have any additional comments. And Claire?
And before you do that, Angela, for those on the phone, if you are a resident and you are not, many of you said, I'm not getting these emails. Go to www.pamedsoc.org/membership and join. Residents may join for free. So we just need you to join so that we're updating you directly through our emails. Of course, you can go to the Hahnemann landing page, but if you're looking for an email, a push, that's the best way for us to know who you are.
Thanks, Claire. So Mark, I'm going to take your comment last and work through the rest of the group. So Dr. Eisenberg, any final words?
Just briefly, big picture view here, this is clearly not fair for all of you who are going through this. And that's one of the reasons why Jeremy and his team are working really diligently to try to not just obtain some money for this, but also some justice, because I know some of the questions have been related to justice in this. And so just know that the stakeholders on this call are also aware of that and also are looking for similar outcomes. And for the people who are MCARE ineligible, I know this may seem like a completely impossible situation because we're telling you to go and get quotes, but many brokers, won't give you quotes because at the time that you were Hahnemann or St. employees, you were MCARE ineligible. That's one of our main focuses now, is to try to find a broker or insurance carrier who will buy standalone tail coverage. And so hang in there and we'll hopefully be able to get you some information in the next week or two. But I think that's the most nebulous part.
Thank you, Dr. Eisenberg. Karen, any final comments?
I guess I want to pick up on a couple of things that Dr. Eisenberg just said. One is that, with these sorts of things, yes, it's not fair. Yes, this is certainly a crisis, but you have to protect yourself because you've been caught in this maelstrom. And so that's really the goal here. And then for any of those, again, those MCARE ineligible, just hang in there for a little bit and get that loss run handled, right? At least make sure that you do that and get that process started and get in that queue. And then I do want to pick up on something else Dr. Eisenberg mentioned is, yes, we do see, sort of sign-on bonuses for when you do your first job. And again, you have to take the long-term view. It's the short-term to reduce your risk, and then the long-term to get your recovery, however long that ends up being. But that's really I guess that's about it for me.
Thank you, Karen. Jeremy, any last thoughts?
No, I mean, I think the message I hope you take away is, from a legal perspective, we're trying to soften what is a bad situation, but and I think the message you heard from everybody is the legal process is not going to result in forcing Hahnemann by its tail, and I urge everyone to go through that process. And just one thing I did forget to mention, one of the conditions of continuing our hearing was that Hahnemann staff up Linda Ramsey's office. I know that's a common complaint we've heard, is the delay in her getting lost information to people to get quotes, and they were supposed to have immediately staffed up that office, and I've asked for detail on that, but hopefully that part of the logjam will lessen.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Brian.
Nothing more, I guess, just to underscore the three things that folks should immediately do. One, join the ad hoc committee, be part of that committee. Two, get quoted on insurance as a backstop, because you're going to need it no matter what. And three, to the extent that funding is an issue, apply for a loan if you need it, so that you've got all of those things in place if needed.
Thank you, Brian. And Mark.
All sage advice today. Most importantly, just to make sure that you check back on that website, and again, keep those questions and coming in so that we can help you to give you as much information as you need so you can make an informed decision.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that. And thank you to all of our presenters. We greatly appreciate the effort and the time. We hope that this webinar has been informative. Please remember to continue to submit your questions. We will take them. We will do our best to answer those questions or try to direct you to a place where you can get the answers that you're seeking. With that, I will turn it over to our communications director for any final words.
Thank you, Angela. Nothing more here. I thank everybody for joining us, and I encourage the residents to join PA-Med at pamedsoc.org/membership. It's a free membership, but that will ensure that you are on our list and you're receiving our communications. Also, just again, encouraging you to go back to our pamedsoc.org/Hahnemann page. We're going to take these questions that we've received from you all and digest them and make sure that all of the ones that we can answer, we will answer and put it on the page. We will also put the recording of this program on the page tomorrow by lunchtime, so you can listen to it again, share with your friends that are affected by this. And I again, just thank you for joining us, and we hope to continue to be a resource for you. Have a good night.